Welcome to Lokad. Every business decision reflects a careful balance between quality, how good a thing is, and how much it costs. But does this quality-cost ratio extend to supply chain? Here to discuss, Lokad founder Joannes Vermorel. So Joannes, the quality-cost ratio, much like scarcity, I'm sure people have a general idea of what other people mean when they use it, but could you give a brief overview of what that means and then connect it explicitly to the topic of supply chain and why it's important?
So quality is, as an attribute, something that you would apply much more to the physical product itself. Let's say an iPhone is a high quality smartphone, for example. Okay, so that's very clear, and you can go, if you think in terms of a product, yes, you can have like a very cheap car, a very high quality, expensive car, and everything in between. Okay, that's probably, the easiest way to approach that. But then if we go to supply chain, it turned out that supply chain is not engineering the products. It's not producing them. So when we think in terms of quality from a supply chain perspective, it's not exactly the attributes, the physical attributes of the products that are being, serviced that are of interest, although this may be a supply chain problem to some extent. We may revisit that maybe later. But fundamentally, this is not there just because it's not the responsibility of supply chain. I mean, if we include that into supply chain, then supply chain becomes so vast that it's kind of meaningless because then supply chain becomes almost indifferentiable from the whole business. So let's, for the sake of clarity, we say that the quality, the physical attributes of the products are not exactly a supply chain problem. That's not what I mean by quality in a supply chain context. By quality in a supply chain context, I refer to the quality of the decisions. Okay. And here we have to, there is first, the first gotcha is probably the quality of the decisions is not the quality of the service as perceived by the client. Let's illustrate just that to further, if we say that, for example, never facing a stock out would be the highest level of immediate service in very simple, let's say, retail settings. This is the highest quality of service from the client perspective, but is it the highest quality in terms of decision, supply chain decision for your business? Absolutely no, because it's going to be the sort of decision that proved to be unsustainably costly for your business. So the quality of the decisions, that's what I mean by the quality versus cost. And here, what sort of tension do we have? Well, in order to get a better decision, we can invest more resources, more people, more software, eventually invest in research and development to improve the whole thing. Those are all the elements on the cost side, and then we will get decisions that have higher quality, but higher quality from a supply chain perspective, which should not be confused, again, as the quality perceived by the client. Supply chain is all about trade-off, so a very, very high quality decision is a decision that really carefully balances all those trade-offs. As I say in my series of lecture, supply chain is a mastery of optionality. So if we say super high quality, what we're saying is that another way to say super high quality would be to define that as a very successful execution of this high mastery, I would say high mastery game, a high level of mastery of this game being played at making supply chain decisions over and over and over.
Well, okay. But to immediately follow back on that, you give the example, and it's a really, really good one, the example of the iPhone. And again, if you talk about the quality of that and quality assurance and all the protocols that go into a quality cost assessment, you can point to the physical properties of an iPhone and say, I don't know, Gorilla Glass on the front, here's the quality of the chip, here's the quality of the storage. I can measure that, and I can say, well, that's high quality. But when you talk about quality of decisions, you're traversing into very, very subjective territory, no?
So I would say on a surface level, yes, when you have physical products, it's more straightforward to assess quality, but only on a surface level.
Okay.
If we go back to the iPhone, which is actually quite a good example, the quality of the iPhone was actually, the first year of the iPhones, the sales were not that great. If I remember correctly, that was decent for Apple, especially since Apple at the time was very, very much struggling, but it was relatively modest. The iPhone exploded a few years later when after the introduction of the app marketplace. And that's where Apple decided that they were going to have this marketplace of literally one-click install for apps where you could just click on an app, pay $1, and then you have an app that is perfectly compatible, super easy to install on your smartphone. And that's where the popularity of and the perceived quality of the iPhone exploded. You see, again, if we look at the physical attributes, yes, that was a very nice device, but the reality is actually the smartphone one was actually quite crappy in terms of just being able to pass phone calls. It was not such a great phone, just being able to do mission number one, which was receive and call with the device. But the perceived quality exploded when they introduced the app marketplace, the App Store, because suddenly this smartphone format made complete sense. You had indeed a mini computer and you could do so much. And then the perceived quality is that it was just not a phone anymore, it was a smartphone. But people may not remember that it didn't came something until after 1 year afterward. So the point that I'm making is that quality, yes, there is some very basic element, that very fundamental, better material, better, I would say, tolerance to stress and fatigue so that the thing doesn't break down, doesn't degrade. It should be light. In general, anything that you want to move, if it's lighter, it's typically better, etc., etc., etc. So yes, there are some very fundamental aspects, but also quality, when we go to physical products, it's frequently, there is more than meet the eyes. There can be all the expectations that you can do more with the products, that you have an ecosystem, that you have all sorts of accessories that play with that, or even if it's just decorative, that it will look good in many situations. You know, an object that is very decorative and it will look like a very nice piece of in your apartment, even if it's very different style of apartment, might be, you know, some sort of super intangible quality, but it's still there to some extent.
But so very little of that translates to supply chain decisions.
So again, I would say quality, yes, it is, I would say for physical products, at the very least, you have a lot of simple backup metrics that are very direct, but still you have this depth that is difficult. And then when we go to supply chain, we are essentially supply chain is a mastery of optionality. So it's literally about observing options and at some point deciding among those options that you've actively cultivated that you're going to pick one and it's going to be your decision. Okay, that's super abstract. So the quality becomes something that is very elusive. Although even if we are talking of something that is fairly elusive, like the quality of decisions, there are still a few metrics that are not that difficult. For example, in the military, they have this saying that, you know, the worst plan is no plan, and that there is nothing worse than, let's say, on the battlefield, than a surgeon that is just indecisive. Indecisiveness is almost always wrong. That means that even if your decision is do nothing, wait for the enemy to make a mistake, that's very different from being indecisive and not doing anything. It's no, I have decided that the best decision that we have is we wait until the timing is right. And that's very, very different from I'm indecisive, I don't know what to do, so I'm just panic and I do nothing. You know, that's completely different mental state. And I would argue that although the decision is kind of the same, you don't do anything, the quality of one decision, like we wait purposefully, intentionally, knowing that we know what we're waiting for versus we are just indecisive and it's in a semi-state of panic. It's very, very very, I would say, different decisions in terms of quality. So even, for example, decisiveness is something that you can measure in a way that is relatively straightforward. So in supply chain settings would be, are you able to make your decision, promptly, or does it take forever for no good reason at all? That would be, some metric, and that's, measuring the time it takes to get to a decision can be something that is measured objectively. So to some extent, you have some easy metrics, but I would say they are not very, very good. Unlike, the thing on the battlefield, if supply chain, there is rarely things that are like super urgent to the next seconds or minutes. So it's not actually that clear. Although obviously, if you go into it takes 4 months to take any kind of decision, then you're probably like very bad, But yes, you have those elements that are more difficult, it's more abstract. And also, it is incredibly open-ended. So there is no clear limit whatsoever into what you could look at to assess the quality of those decisions.
Well, it occurs to me that there are, the analogy of the general on the battlefield, and any decision is better than complete indecisiveness. Well, I mean, there are already KPIs that companies will use to assess the quality or the performance. Let's just say performance for now, and then we can talk about quality. To assess the performance of the supply chain. So, for example, service levels for any given reference, or in some cases, how accurate a demand forecast is. There are KPIs to tell you, well, that was 50% accurate, 60% accurate. Are you saying that that's better than nothing?
Not quite. First, because those KPIs, they don't really reflect quality in a genuine, deep sense. They are just numerical artifacts. Most of those KPIs are just numerical artifacts.
What do you mean by that when you say numerical artifact?
So it's numbers that are defined according to some semi-straightforward mathematical definition. But why would this I would say mathematical definition has any correlation with quality in a genuine sense.
So you mean they're just numbers? They're just numbers on a page?
They are just numbers, and again, not any kind of numbers. Numbers that are typically derived from textbooks or formulas. And when you see, for example, if I say mean square error for the forecasting accuracy, fine. This is a very popular metric. That's a metric that you will find in many textbooks, mathematical textbooks. Why do you have these metrics? Well, you have these metrics in textbooks because you have a lot of theorems. That's the norm 2. That's the mean square matrix. You have norm 1, norm 2, etc. And you have a lot of theorems, mathematical theorems, statistical theorems that are associated to this metric. So you see, but the problem is that it is, I would say, an inward-looking perspective. You have the mathematical worlds where people have said, why are you interested in this norm 2? The answer is because I have so many theorems that are associated to this norm 2, I can play with that. I can elaborate many abstract construction and do a lot of things mathematically speaking. Fine, that makes it an interesting mathematical object, just like prime numbers, for example. Prime numbers are fascinating mathematical numbers, I would say mathematical constructs. They are very real in a mathematical sense also as well, but it doesn't, that alone doesn't prove that there is any kind of correlation to the sort of quality and success that your supply chain will enjoy.
And tie that nice analogy then to service levels.
So service level. Why should you have any kind of correlations? Yes, to some extent, if you have like 0% service level, you don't sell anything. Yes. So it looks like kind of bad. If you have like 100% service level, it is also bad because it means that you have
a lot of dead stock.
You have always inventory write-off because if you do not allow yourself to ever have out of stock, that means that you can't ever liquidate anything. Okay, so that's the extreme are pretty bad, but again, this is pretty much obvious. So in between, anything goes, kind of. You know that the optimal is not at the extreme,
yeah.
but in between, my guess is as good as yours. It's just very, very fuzzy. So, and again, this is I'm very suspicious when people give me a percentage as supposedly a measure of performance or quality, just because, well, where is the reasoning? It's just something that falls out of the sky. You just give me a formula, and unless you have like a very, very strong argumentation to back this up, I have no reason to believe that this numerical artifact is appropriate. It's just something random that you pulled out of a mathematical or statistical textbook, and this is it. And the interesting thing is that if we go to this sort of KPI mindset, is that when it comes to quality, when you look for I would say textbook about design and let's say manufacturing, this is something where there is a lot of nuanced discussion going there. For example, even if we go into the testament of a furniture dealer from the founder of IKEA, which is a beautiful document, super short, I really recommend to the audience. One of the points, I forget if it's point 11 or 14, there is like 20 points. And one of the points is of the IKEA founder is do not be misled by some easy metrics about quality for the products. For example, he says the first thing is if you want to have like nice surface, keep in mind that only the surface that people can touch and see matter. And he's talking about furniture. He said, do not pride yourself into, for example, having like a high quality surface that is going to be super durable, super smooth, super good looking over the years if people can't see it and can't touch it. So he was in the text referring to something like the back of the furniture or the something that is under the table, something that you will never really appreciate. So he was saying that when you invest in quality, make sure that it's something that is truly relevant and not some kind of abstract measure of the quality, like I have high quality materials or high quality surface everywhere, including the surfaces that do not matter from the eye of the client. And why? And he was mentioning that, he was saying, because if you do that, and he mentioned that in his short point, is that if you do that, then customers end up paying for quality that they will not enjoy. And from his perspective, that was kind of bad. They have to pay every single cent that they pay is for the quality that they will enjoy. And that was a very nuanced. So I would say if we go to design manufacturing, you have this sort of very nuanced discussion about, quality versus cost, exactly how do you approach that. But if we go to the supply chain world with decision-making process, this thing is absent, completely absent. The mainstream supply chain theory, and I would even say that the mainstream business theory, I would say, MBA style, the business studies, it is very much absent. When it comes to quality of decisions, people would have like reasoning that are very, very binary. I've never seen, for example, in a textbook about supply chain or even general business studies, discuss in depth the spectrum of investment and resources that you can spend to make your decisions a little bit better until I would say the diminishing returns just undermine your efforts, and then the cost exceed what you get from getting the decision better. And again, if you think of this quality of chasing the right service level, for example, companies would just say we have those targets of service level, but what about the investment that you make, both CapEx and OpEx, into chasing the right service level? Again, the service level is not a great, just not a great KPI, but just to keep it simple for the audience, I will refer to that as at least it's something they're familiar with. So even if you pick a service level and you say, this is my target, this is what it should be, the best trade-off for my supply chain and my company, what is the quality of this assessment? Should you invest, you came up with a number, let's say 95%, but is it the the best number that you came up with? And should you invest more to refine this number further or not? And why? And it's typically never discussed. In supply chain textbooks, people just give you a recipe and we say you apply that, and then you have like two situations. Are you're compliant to your process or non-compliant? And this is it. The spectrum of, not spectrum of compliance, the spectrum of refining what even compliance means and what quality means and what should be the direction you're looking at and what should be even the journey is just absent.
Okay, I don't disagree with that, but there are 2 points. The first one would be, which one do I want to go with first? Okay, yeah, I'll go actually with the person and then I'll go to technology. So on the personal level, when you talk about indecisiveness and the fuzziness of these boundaries, isn't it possible or reasonable to say that the existence of these sort of binary acceptable, not acceptable, good, bad, these demarcations that lack finesse, which I grant lack finesse, aren't they a result of the fact that what you're describing is a level of complexity that goes beyond the human mind? And that's why there are these very crude heuristics like, go, no go, good, bad. Yeah. And I agree, it lacks sophistication, but it's a result not of stupidity, just how exactly can you balance, how can you spin millions and millions of plates?
Yeah, I would agree that I completely agree that it's the result of the human mind, but not necessarily the way people would see it, generally. I would say I agree. Is that you're dealing with humans, and humans are incredibly complicated. And it's not that the human mind has some limitation. Is that you are dealing with a cohort of people that are individually incredibly complex, each one of them. And so, indeed, you have to resort to very simple criteria, not because your mind is truly limited. It's just that you're dealing with, entities, people that are individually so incredibly complex that it's not going to, you get the diminishing returns like super, super fast just because it is incredibly difficult. Let's say you have like a 100 demand and supply planner. It would be an immense amount of efforts to achieve those sort of, I would say, a very high level of finesse and whatnot. So I agree with the statement that it's too much, but not so much because there is some limit in our understanding. We can do a lot. It's just that you're dealing with people that are so incredibly complex and nuanced, extra, that trying to engineering that, and plus, just to the fact that they are complex, they have a will of their own extra. Most of the attempt at being, I would say, hyper-rational are just going to backfire at you. That's the curse of if you try to incentivize people, they will game that and respond badly. So usually that's the problems when you're dealing with incredibly complex situation. Usually keeping it super simple is a safe bet, and that's what happens. So I believe that you're completely correct. But then that's another topic, is that supply chain is not, in my eyes, now that we're in the 21st century, it is not intended or should not to be managed, operated through people at all levels. Yes, at the top we have people, but the execution layer, this thing should be, mechanized entirely.
Well, that was going to be my next question then. Like, the absence of this perspective that we're outlining in traditional textbooks is surely a consequence of the fact that we now live in an age where we have machine learning, we have AI, we have automation on a scale and to a degree of granularity that didn't exist 5 decades ago, even 2 decades ago. So your response?
Yeah, and that's where it gets very, very interesting, is that if you say that the decisions are going to be engineered, that's going to be a machine that generates those smart decisions. And yes, it's artificial intelligence, not general artificial intelligence, but it is artificial. And if it is, repetitively a series of good decisions, we can agree that at least it has a modicum of intelligence, or it is intelligence in its own, super shallow, limited way, but it's certainly not dumb, I would say. So here, LLMs, those large language models, I think the interesting thing is that they demonstrate in ways that are very straightforward and very illustrative what I mean by, quality versus cost.
Okay.
For the audience, if you've played with, let's say, ChatGPT, the free version, that is GPT 3.5, versus the paid version, that is GPT 4, you will see that if you pay more, you will get something that is smarter. And that's very interesting because you have, with those LLMs, you have like a whole series of models that goes from the small models that are cheap and fast to bigger models that are slower, more, I would say, more costly and indeed much higher quality. And the interesting thing is that you literally have this spectrum of intelligence. I mean, yes, again, I'm not saying that they are, this is general intelligence. It is like a shallow, narrow form of intelligence, but it is there. And you can experience for yourself in ways that are very, very direct. Like you can interact with a sort of dialogue and you try to get this LLM, solve a problem for you. And you can try that with GPT, let's say, 2, GPT 3.5, and GPT 4. And you will be most likely baffled by the sort of level of intelligence that you get. And it's kind of very granular. There are stuff that will work and that will confuse smaller models. And then when you ramp up to bigger, smarter models, you get, discussions that have more depth, where the answers are more nuanced, where it captures the intent of your question better, etc., etc. So you can literally see for yourself what it means to have like more high quality decisions, in the sense that you ask a question to the LLM, it gives you an answer. That would be, sort of quality that is at stake here. And even if this perception of quality, for example, a very good answer, plain text, to a question is very elusive, how do you measure, generally speaking, the quality of an answer to a general question? You can get the vibe of this, spectrum of quality literally in minutes. It doesn't require you to have like a PhD in machine learning. You can play with literally 10 minutes with GPT 3.5, play 10 minutes with GPT 4, and you will get it. You will see this sort of extra quality that there is in every single answer that the system produces. And that's, I think, this had been existing at Lokad for almost a decade, this sort of nuance. But due to the fact that we didn't have any way to demonstrate these sort of things, because it's supply chains, decisions are, again, very frequently very abstract, very somewhat opaque, because they are related to a supply chain you might not be familiar with. There's a lot of shenanigans. You deal with a complex applicative landscape, etc., etc., etc. So it's not exactly...
You can't point and touch a decision.
Yeah, and it's not like the sort of things that are easy to demonstrate. And even if you can demonstrate, people are not going to perceive this sort of nuance between lower quality and higher quality just because they are lacking information and context and whatnot. But LLMs, that was, I think, where it was a breakthrough, is that suddenly the layman could just, play with that and see, oh, yes, for this amount of money, I get a decision that is, that much better, and it's kind of obvious. And then you realize that you have some situations that do not call for smarter decision. It's not always better. You have some stuff where just getting the answer faster is good enough. This is the right trade-off. And you realize that in terms of intelligence, it is not, higher quality is not always just better. You have a trade-off. At some point, faster is better, actually, rather than smarter.
How does, because I know that we now use LLMs as well as part of our offering, how exactly does the inclusion of LLMs change the quality cost ratio, which is already quite abstract? Now we're adding another layer of abstraction, which is LLMs. But pragmatically or practically speaking, in an example preferably, how does this influence the quality cost ratio from the supply chain perspective?
I mean, it does change because LLMs are so expensive for now. I mean, the audience may not realize, but LLMs, they're great, but they are costly. I mean, as a rule of thumb, to process 1 kilobyte of data with an LLM costs you something like 1 million times more than doing pretty much any other sort of calculation with the same kilobyte of data. So literally, LLMs are orders, and I don't mean like 1 or 2, I mean like 6 or 7 times more expensive per kilobyte of data processing, and slower as well, compared to any sort of calculation that you have. So
Are you talking they're quantitative or qualitative or both?
no. I mean, just all the just factual metrics, how much time and cost it will cost you to process a kilobyte. I mean, think about it. You can, for most LLMs, you can see the text being streamed in front of you. People think it's cool, but me as a computer scientist, I think it's, wow, that's so 1950. Computers are now so fast that normally you can display, I would say, thousands of lines in milliseconds. When you have a well-designed web page, it will display, endless wall of text in milliseconds, and you will not see the text being printed, 1 character at a time. Why? Because it's so fast that it is below the perception. If you go back in the 1960s, you could see, in very old movies, the text being printed a character at a time. If you go back to the movies, the James Bond of the 60s and whatnot, you will see the sort of ancient terminals where you could see the text being, displayed 1 line at a time. And why is that? It was because those computers at the time were so sluggish that you could see that. And the reason now where you click a web page and bam, it displays, and usually when the page is slow, it's because you're loading the equivalent of 10 for hundreds of thousands of pages of text in this web page, and it doesn't make any sense, whatever. Bad software engineering. But bottom line, text should be instant. I mean, it cannot be truly instant in the physical sense, but it should be, walls of text should be so fast that it's way beyond the perception threshold of the human mind. The fact that you can see the thing being displayed, it just tells you that this thing is impossibly slow. So back to your question, why should it impact? Well, LLMs are very costly, so you will realize that you have to pay attention, because those, OpenAI has such a crazy valuation because, investors are not idiots. They see, companies are throwing money like crazy at those systems, like millions of dollars. And they say, we want to save money on IT. And bam, OpenAI comes along. And there are companies that say, we are proud to spend $1 million a month on those LLMs. Congratulations. So you've just exploded your IT budget. Maybe you have like a solid reason to do that, but let's make no mistake, it is costly. And there are even situations at Lokad where we see where we say, no, at this point, it's actually cheaper to have like an expensive white collar in Paris, like because it's cheaper. So that it's not, that's, so LLMs are, again, I think it matters in this way, just because they are expensive, so you have to pay attention. And you will see that if you're doing it right, there are places where you need to say, no, we are not going to do that because it's just too costly, or we need to fall back into some sort of cheaper version of LLM that is not as intelligent, because if we do it with like the most expensive stuff that we can get from the market, it's going to be too expensive.
Yes, and the thing is, what I was driving at with the example is, and again, you can correct the details where I'm wrong, but I remember one of the conversations we had that kind of inspired the idea for this recording was you gave the example. Imagine we're a company, we place purchase orders, and our supplier is a bit unreliable. We suspect they're unreliable. We suspect there might be a better option on the market. We could source from somewhere else. but I mean, there's only 3 of us on staff. Am I going to dedicate your time to doing an analysis to find others, to find other potential suppliers? So you could use an LLM to, each time you place a purchase order, perform an automatic sourcing analysis, and then at your leisure, review that. And that would be significantly cheaper than dedicating your mental bandwidth and your time and your effort, etc. And then that scales. So again, I think that's what I'm driving at in terms of how that impacts the quality cost.
Yes, it does scale, but it's not free. You see, that the thing is that if you decide, for example, at every purchase order you do that, what will be the cost? I mean, just doing a sourcing operation, you are going to scan web pages with LLMs. So you're going to scan, again, maybe up to 1 megabyte of text because you will analyze the web. It's not cheap. So you may end up, and then you will have to compose emails and maybe start to have the LLMs with a few scripts to send an email, process the answer, do some back and forth just like a human do. And yes, you may have something that is completely automated, but you may realize that every single time that you trigger that to do like a sourcing survey, it costs you like $5 worth of LLM. Yes, it's cheap. It is certainly cheaper to have like one person spend 2 days on the case, but it's not exactly free.
Sorry, it's cheaper than having one person.
It's cheaper than having one person spending 2 days, but it's not exactly free. If you say that you're willing to spend $5 every single time you pass a purchase order, you may realize at the end of the year that you spend a lot of money. Maybe you don't want to do that always.
But that's an extreme. Again, that's another extreme. Like there will be a sweet spot where you...
Exactly, and that's where we have this spectrum. And here, remember when I said from the mainstream perception, mainstream, I would say view, when it is about people, you just think adequate or inadequate, or you will go for a process that just enforce. You may be aware that there is a spectrum, but you address this spectrum in a very crude way, such as sourcing operation. Every supplier is revisited once a year, period. And that's your process, keep it simple, etc. That's fine. But you see, this is where instead of trying to have like a nuanced approach to the spectrum, you just have the hammer of the process, bam, and you solve that in a very binary sort of resolution. And here with LLMs, well, you can engineer your spectrum. You can say, well, I can go from resourcing my options at every order. That's option, extreme, or just do it like once a year. That's the other extreme. And anything in between is acceptable, and you can do that, and you can work with that. So it's interesting because you see, you can engineer the quality of your decisions, your quality of your optionality, and then you have a real cost trade-off to deal with. And that's something that I would say, again, the mainstream supply chain perspective just do not even remotely discuss that. I've never seen any supply chain textbooks that says how you're going to engineer the process that generate the decisions so that per dollar invested, you get the biggest bang for buck, at the decision generation level. That's something that just isn't just there.
How exactly do you delimit or identify the gradations along that spectrum from that's an extreme, that's slightly less extreme, it's very, very good, etc., all the way back down to the far end, which is no, completely unacceptable? Is it possible to quantitatively identify, again, the steps between each of these nodules? Excuse me.
I mean, to some extent it is, and And why is that? It's because, again, from our perspective, a modern supply chain is executed by software. So that's the very interesting thing, is that this decision layer is a machine. It is a complex piece of software with a set of numerical recipes, and you can reason about. The limit of that is that, okay, even if you can reason about that, people who are dealing with the engineering of that, it's still human, it's still people. So there is, limit to the recursion. But at least, because at some point you have to decide how many supply chain scientists do you want.
Yeah.
And here that's a judgment call. But at the very least, the base layer that generates the decisions, it is a machine, and thus it can be engineered. And there are plenty of stuff, again, where you, just like for the product, I mentioned at the very, very start, where if it's a physical product, you have some easy metrics. Well, if it's a piece of software that you have to run, you also have a series of easy metrics, especially on the cost side, how much time it takes, how much memory it consumes, how much disk it consumes extra. So you have all of that, and then you can actually see when you, let's say, you have a whole spectrum, you have a lot of things that are optional. That you may run or not run. For example, you can decide that you're going to do your pricing analysis with competitive intelligence. So you will get the data of your competitor. But how many competitors are we talking about? Scanning the web is not free. It costs money. And again, for those who are familiar with the I would say the scrapping business, web scrapping, scanning the websites of your peers. There is some substantial cost associated to that. If you want to rescan every page of your competitor daily, the cost is non-trivial, especially if your competitors have tens of thousands of products on display. And so how many competitors are we talking about? Do you want to scan your number 1 competitor, your top 3 competitors, or top 20 competitors? The cost is pretty much linear. The more websites you want to monitor, your cost will pretty much grow linearly with the number of competitors. But the information that you will get is obviously with diminishing returns. Why? Because your competitors, they also monitor their competitors. So if you monitor, let's say, your top 3 competitors, it turned out those competitors, they also kind of monitor their top 3 or 5 competitors. And that may include companies that you do not monitor. So in the end, it's everybody monitor kind of everybody. And if you look at the graph of who is monitoring who, you will see that it's a very highly connected graph where pretty much everybody is monitoring a bit of everybody. The big guys are going to monitor predominantly other big guys plus maybe one smaller competitor. Smaller competitors are going to monitor a few smaller competitors and just one big guy just for the sake of it, and this sort of thing. So the bottom line is that it is, although it is difficult, it is not, and you can get this sense of there is diminishing returns. Why? Because when you run your algorithms with or without, let's say, a data set, you can get a sense that whether it really improve or really nudge the results. For example, if you said that you want to do a pricing optimization, and then you realize that up to 3 competitors, it really changed quantitatively the price. So adding one extra competitor really changed the price that you get at the end. So you would say, well, if it's, I trust my numerical recipe, and if I say that it's adding this 3rd competitor to the mix, change my prices on average from, let's say, 0.75%, less than 1%, but 0.47%. Okay, it's not insignificant, it's still something. But then you add the 4th competitor, and then you see that it's 0.01% change. I don't know if this 0.1% is like super critical to my business. I don't know, but still it's an upper bound to the amount of profit that this thing can generate. At best case, it's 0.1% of margin. If the price was exactly nudged in the right direction every time. But still, that puts an upper bound to the impact it could have. And here you can say, well, it feels like really super small. And so I would say, diminishing return, I do not do that because the cost for this 4th competitor, it may not be worth it. So you see, there might be ways, there are typically ways to approach that. And we can see this sort of nuance and gradation. And it is typically something that emerge when you start using numerical recipes that are more sophisticated, more intelligent, more, that they can do more. Because if we want to have the human analogy, is that again, when you start using software that is very, sophisticated and smart, suddenly it starts looking a little bit like your headcount. How many people do I want to, tackle this problem? Except that you have, I would say, a much more direct control. And if you want to scale up, scale down, you don't have to fire people, you don't have to care about their ego and whatnot. So that let you do that let you really, engineer the whole thing, as opposed to be dealing with people that typically respond very negatively to you trying to engineer their day-to-day process.
Well, it occurs to me that now, in the previous iteration, or in the classic perspective, we didn't have the quality cost dilemma or the quality cost ratio because supply chain was governed by very simple but understandable heuristics. Now you're saying that with the advance of technology, we can actually now, to whatever degree of precision, we can in fact quantify the quality cost ratio. That now, of supply chain decisions. That then leads to the next question, which is, when you break apart those two concepts, quality and cost, now, using software, using AI, whatever you want, to evaluate the supply chain decisions, cost is understandable, like how much money did you spend? Is quality still a subjective sentiment, like, oh, how good was it? Or are you talking about the return on investment for that cost? Like, how does this now change?
So I would say, first I would point the audience, and I will jump to your question, but I would point the audience that most of the sort of trade-off that are presented in supply chain, like let's say the typical triangle of cash, cost, and service, these sort of things. What I really like about this quality cost dilemma is that it really elevates the topic. I believe that all those sort of trade-offs, first, in terms of, if we take this triangle, I think there is many more dimensions than that. It's not a triangle. The triangle is like very simplistic. You have like a dilemma with an n-dimensional dilemmas where you have like hundreds of, I would say, things that pull your directions in all sorts of directions.
The constraints,
constraints, drivers, and whatnot. Yeah. So it's literally trade-off all over the place with at dimension 100 and more. That's what it looked like. And the interesting thing about the cost quality dilemma at this sort of playing the supply chain games is that it elevates the topic at, it is not about those trade-off. It is about the meta problem of how do you engineer a piece of software that solves this problem. That's how you're going to, because through this quality, you will do this kind of assessment of all those trade-offs. So when we say this quality versus cost trade-off in the mastery of optionality, what we're saying is that we invest in just figuring out those 100 drivers and constraints that just frame the supply chain game that you're playing. It's a very, I would say, meta perspective. It's instead of thinking, do I have the right service level? You're thinking, do I have a software that is going to be figuring out what better quality means for my clients? Oh, that's like very, very meta. That's what the things we are talking of. Okay. Back to your question, and I got distracted a little bit with your question, and it was, sorry.
Do you measure quality purely in terms of the subjective sentiment, or is it driven by financial return?
I would say the theory would be it should be purely quantitative returns.
Okay.
But and that's where in practice it's going to be purely subjective. So that's very strange, because say, oh, you just told me it is, in theory, completely quantitative, but in practice, it's going to be completely subjective.
There's no contradiction there.
So the reality is, yes, from a very theoretical perspective, what you want is engineer the long-term profitability of your company. Yes. So it is quantitative, kind of in essence. Now, the problem is that when you look far ahead, all your quantitative indicators completely lose relevance. So my personal take is that if you have the belief that you can take the numbers that you have today and project that a decade into the future, and that those numbers will tell you something of value, I would say that you're deluded.
Yeah.
So you see, it is an illusion. It is, and I say that I would say, in my professional capacity of number cruncher. At Lokad, we do crunch numbers for a living, and we have been doing that for a decade and a half. Numbers becomes completely meaningless when you project that a decade into the future. Why is that? It's because supply chain are competitive. It is a game that is played against, I would say, super intelligent entity. When I say super intelligent, is that your competitors, they are more than the sum of their parts. They are made of many employees. So the aggregation of that is that you're facing an entity that is super intelligent in the sense of more intelligent than any human on earth. If you're playing, let's say, against a company, Apple, Trek, and whatnot, it's a collection of experts, of very smart people, and the net result is that those people are going to do things that are going to surprise you. They are going to outcompete you in so many ways. Plus, you have like new entrants, new rivals, and whatnot. So the bottom line is that you cannot take the situation of the market right now for granted and extend that 10 years into the future. That's a very, very big mistake.
So just to drop a pin there, because I want to make sure I, as well as anyone watching, understands that. Are you basically making the same argument about the quality-cost ratio as you are about forecasting in general? Like there's a limited time horizon in terms of its validity?
Yes,
okay.
Yes, exactly. And again, validity, statistical validity, you can do that. So you could say, you can make, let's say, an argument that, let's say, the consumption of milk, I take a very basic product, that fresh milk will be this 10 years from now in the French market and be fairly accurate. Because again, you have such a track record. Where I disagree is that you can base your business strategy on that.
Yeah.
Why? Because a decade from now, maybe what will make a brand of fresh milk appealing to the product may be completely different from what it is now. Maybe there will be like a new labels, there will be new standards of expectations of what is like a truly high quality organic product actually means. This is a game that is played very aggressively. So maybe the consumption of milk will be still pretty much the same, but it might or it might not be on a fundamentally different games, just because the sort of branding that you will need to do that, the sort of packaging will come with very subtle differences that makes all the difference. Yes, I expect that 10 years from now it will still be like mostly white bottles. Yes, okay. But that's missing the point that you can have so many little nuance in that can make all the difference in terms of capturing market shares, making a profit, and whatnot. So you see, it is not granted. And if you look at even very, very successful companies, let's say Coca-Cola company, they have been consistently reinventing themselves in terms of image and branding. And there is like both continuity and reinvention every decade. So this is not just doing and playing the same game. It is quite impressive when you look at companies like Coca-Cola. They have been successfully reinventing themselves, for basically 100 years. So it's very, very impressive. And that is what I say. Where, if we go back to the initial question, it is, I would say, at a fundamental level, yes, you're chasing profit. Yes. And yes, this is something that in the future, the quality of your decision will be assessed into, let's say, hard-earned euros or dollars. So ultimately, it will be quantitative and purely quantitative. If you're very, very successful, it will show in monetary terms. But due to the fact that when you project yourself, far into the future, those KPIs just cease to be relevant. Especially, at the end of the day, it is almost entirely judgment calls and thus qualitative, just because I would say, empirically speaking, they yield better results. I say that as a professional data cruncher. I say that something that I say to the Lokad clients is that do not let your 10 years ahead strategy be dictated by the numbers that you see right now. It is misleading. It is a mistake. The market will evolve in a way that will make those numbers irrelevant in a way. Even if the projected numbers happen to be true, like future consumption of milk, there will be other things that will make those numbers irrelevant, just because your competitors will kind of find their ways to, outcompete you in surprising ways. That's what the competition is doing at a broader level.
Well, I think we've been talking for about an hour, and if I could summarize that in a question, so summary plus a question, if the true quality cost dilemma or ratio, whatever way you want to put it, in supply chain is as complex as you've described and as expensive to resolve as you've described, and has such a limited time horizon, much like forecasting itself, as you have described, then why exactly should people shift from the very convenient, very discrete, very understandable, simple heuristics of good, bad service levels? Because why do it despite or in light of everything you've just described? What's the incentive?
I mean, the incentive is just like, becoming a master at chess. It's very difficult, very expensive, very time consuming, but you do it to win. So you see, the thing is that, again, you have competitors, and people say the supply chains of today have grown incredibly complex. So there is a potential to make it better that is also kind of huge. Again, that's the interesting thing, is that supply chains have grown in complexity enormously over the last 5 decades, because companies have, I attribute that to the digitalization. Companies have ERPs, they have WMS, they have e-commerce platforms. So they have gained the possibility to just execute super complex supply chains, and they do. And when I talk to a lot of clients, there is very few clients that told me, you know what, we want to go back to to more simple, less products, longer lead times. So let's keep it simpler. Things like longer lead times, like, for example, we produce after the fact that we have received the purchase orders, made on order. There is very few companies that say, you know what, we want to go back to that made on order because it was making everything so simpler. No, it's not exactly the sort of direction we're taking. So the bottom line is that supply chain, through digitalization, and make no mistake, digitalization is ancient. It's something that happened 3 decades ago, have become massively more complex. And so, but the capacity to, really optimize this game that has grown massively in complexity, it's like 5-dimensional chess or whatever, has not progressed nearly as fast. So that's the interesting thing, is that although, if I go back to this anecdote, my 2 parents started at Procter & Gamble 4 decades ago, more than 4 decades ago. And at the time, they had literally something like 200 products for the whole company and the French market. So it was a game that was very simple to play. And this has grown, let's say, 2 orders of magnitude in terms of complexity, at least, if not 3. And it is still the same sort of naive recipes and whatnot, but so there is like a big potential. And yes, it is very difficult. I agree. It is challenging. I agree. But if you don't do that, somebody will do it for you. And people, observe Amazon. Oh, Amazon is such a massive company, and it is so profitable, and it is still growing. And people say, yeah, but you know what? That's, I would say when you observe Amazon growing, so large and so fast, my reaction is also that pretty much there is like entire class of competitors that do not that failed at challenging Amazon, at embracing this super aggressive way to engineer the supply chain, and the sort of things that I've described here. It's the sort of games that have been played for more than a decade at Amazon. And yes, people see that it's an absolute giant that is way past these economies of scale. I mean, the game that Amazon is playing for nowadays is Amazon is so large that what people don't really realize is that Amazon operates with a massive disadvantage. They have like a massive handicap. Think of it like, a huge handicap, as if you were playing golf with somebody who has like a blindfold on their eyes and they have to play against you. So they're so large that they have this absolutely massive handicap, and they still grow and they still outcompete, tons of businesses. And I see that to a large extent to a reflection that many companies has failed to improve their supply chain game. I mean, just look at that. Amazon is now managing something like 300 million listed products. Oof, that's literally almost 2 orders of magnitude more than pretty much any other giant company. That is very, very impressive. So again, my take is that will be concluding thought. This dilemma of quality of decision versus investment, it is the sort of meta game that is being played, and it is above the sort of usual traditional trilemma, cash versus cost versus service and whatnot. This is the meta game that is being played, and I would say for you, if you don't start playing this sort of meta game, well, you're just going to lose the game, because you don't realize what it takes to really engineer a superior form of supply chain for your company. You're stuck into trying to address the game itself, but now it's a meta game. Just like if you want to really win at chess nowadays, you can only win through software. It has been 2 decades since the machine beat the worldwide champion of chess. So now if you want to play chess, in order to win, in absolute terms, it is software all the way. It is only about a team that is engineering a piece of software versus another team that plays that engineer a piece of software. If you think that you can win chess through your, I would say, direct action, you've lost. It is now a battle that is only waged between teams engineering pieces of software. People would say, "Oh, you lost it. It's not as interesting." I would say, as far as I'm concerned, it is fascinating. I mean, it's still seeing those teams of engineers, come up with better ideas and engineering different ways to craft. To be honest, I've never been, super interested into chess. I've always been much more interested into the sort of engineering the software that solves chess. And my take is that, even if you're kind of scared because you've transitioned from playing chess to sort of meta game of what do I do to have this piece of software, overall it makes the game much more interesting. Don't fear that. Overall, it is much more interesting, much more satisfying, and supply chains are so complex that you don't have to be afraid if you're not like a programming wizard. The problem is so vast that you have you have ample areas of where you will be able to develop your skills and find your path in this, I would say, in this journey.
Well, as a concluding thought, because we are wrapping up, I guess, we often say seek progress, not perfection, or progress, not perfection.
Exactly.
So again, we're not suggesting shoot straight into Amazon setup, but as an actionable next step. If someone was trying to pivot from, okay, I'm convinced that the classic binary, it's good or bad, service level perspective is flawed. Okay, I want to move in the direction of Amazon. What is a simple next step?
First, identify the decisions that are taking place in your supply chain. Identify them, and then spend, I would say, genuine time to assess, in a very, very broad sense, what quality means, what betterment means. That's just synonymous and of your supply chain. And I'm always surprised, like people say, "Oh, improvement of supply chain, it's Yeah, better service level. No, it's not. Or it's about the cost. Yeah, no, it's not. It's just a fraction of that. And just think of, instead, for example, having this trilemma of cost versus service versus quality. And again, here it's quality, defining quality of service in a very specific way, like service level way. I would say the challenge I would pose to the audience is find 20 dimensions to your supply chain. You should be able to find 20. It's not that hard. You will see when you really think hard that there is at least 20 dimensions that are just pulling.
But which mean like drivers, constraints,
consideration, exactly.
Concrete
angles,
and abstract.
Even
angles.
That are different. And don't be seduced by those like super simplistic framework that promise you to solve your supply chain with, let's say, a trilemma. That's, instead of having like a dilemma and two things that pulls in direction. Look at it from, identify those 20 dimensions, brainstorm, and then you will start to comprehend that it is a very complex game being played and that deserve, an answer that kind of embrace that. And again, approximately correct is better than exactly wrong. Yes, your answer might be kind of crude, but at least it is a lot more all-encompassing as opposed to be like, I have this optimal model that is just looking at 2 dimensions among 20, and that's giving you like an illusion of optimality, because it's an optimality, but in an incredibly narrow, simplistic way that don't even closely acknowledge what it generally means to have like this high quality supply chain execution that your company really need.
All right. Well, Joannes, I have no further questions. Thank you very much for your time. And thank you very much for watching. We'll see you next time.